Sunday in week 6 of the European Hearthstone Grandmasters. I'm That's Admirable, and I'm joined by Sottle. And Sottle, do you know what Sunday means?
More Hearthstone?
That's right. It means we have 6 matches. Six matches. I'm repeating myself for dramatic effect.
Echo.
How are you doing today, Sottle?
I'm doing fantastic. I cannot wait. Extra matches, extra excitement, and we have got some real nail-biters coming up because as we're getting towards the end of Season 1, we kind of talked about this fallacy yesterday, but we are at least creating the feeling that the matches are now more important as players can get their qualification wrapped up.
Rather, Sottle created the inverse of that by trying to be too logical as he normally is. We can take a look at the standings, though, and you can see exactly how they mean more than they normally do, because you need to get to that top 3 to advance to the playoff spots. And we've seen Pheno and Psycho really doing a number on the field here. They've had fantastic seasons thus far. But what I'm looking at is some of the matches that we're going to have going on today, which we're going to be talking about here. But Viper and Bunny Hopper are going to be facing off. They are neck and neck in the standings. And Psycho and Hunter Ace are going to be facing off. And the two of them, this is a very important match for Hunter Ace because he can secure one of those spots with a win today.
Yeah, it's so... It kind of warms my heart to see Psycho and Hunter Ace kind of chilling at the top of that group. I think Psycho is one of the most underappreciated players in the world. The only thing that would really round that out for me is to see Yarla up there as well, because I think he is in that same category as well. You know, there are a lot of incredible Hearthstone players, and the ones that do pull down the big tournament wins are, of course, rightly going to receive the most plaudits. But the likes of Psycho and Yarla are right up there in terms of technical skill with everyone else. Psycho, at least in the early portion of the season, proved that by being incredibly dominant. But now Hunter Ace is right on his heels. And as you mentioned, you can see their match number 6. They are going to face off. Psycho with a win, I believe, just wraps up a guaranteed berth through to finals at that point. Hunter Ace with a win can stake his own claim to be first place in the division, at the end of the season.
Yeah, and you mentioned Yarla and how badly you were looking forward to seeing that, because I definitely agree with you. I think Yarla is a fantastic player that I would love to see more of. He's going to be facing off in the feature match of the day versus Orange, who needs another big win here this week if he's going to keep his dreams alive. He ended up picking up the big win versus RDU, where they were neck and neck. But that whole division, everything is stacking in the middle, where it's almost anybody's game at that point to make that playoff spot. And for Psycho, you know, talking about his season and how I think that he also has largely gone unnoticed in a big regard. Unless you are one of his peers or someone who intently follows competitive Hearthstone, you likely had not heard much about Psycho other than in Grandmasters here, where he has just looked so good. Honestly, I had not seen much of Psycho play. I had just seen his name a lot at the top of standings. You know, I can't recall much outside of like a couple playoff performances here and there. I couldn't see it on a consistent basis.
Yeah, he's for sure one of those players that you hear referenced by other players, right? There's been numerous players that fall into that camp in the past. But for example, when Sintalol was making a lot of high-profile appearances, Psycho was a player that he would very heavily reference in terms of people that have helped him out, built his decks, practiced with him, all that kind of stuff. And historically, players that you hear their name mentioned that often, they do eventually get their moment, and Psycho is no exception to that rule.
Indeed. And another player that we hear the name mentioned often is Viper, and oftentimes it's directly in tandem with Bunny Hopper. He had mentioned yesterday in his winner's interview, that he had to face off against Bunny Hopper and that this was a really important match for the two of them, which is one of the matches that we're going to end up focusing on today, because they are really neck and neck in those standings. And the two of them working in tandem so often with each other, you constantly hear them reference one another with how their play is and how it's sculpting what they've brought to a certain week of Grandmasters, how they've prepared for a tournament. It's reflected in that performance all throughout last year, throughout the tour stop history. And so now they're having to face off for the second time in Grandmasters, and I don't think the match could be more important for the two of them.
It probably could not, and I think we heard Viper himself yesterday echoing that sentiment, where he said he felt this was a big week for him, primarily because of this match that he has against Bunny Hopper, which is a do-or-die performance for him.
Yeah, and Viper also has some interesting ideas in his deck list when you take a look at it. He brought Cyclone Mage this week, and one of the big things I look at is his tertiary deck and how it's shaped to fight off against other mages. We've seen Questing Adventurer come in, we've seen Snap Freeze come in, but now he's added another early game threat that he spoke about the importance of with Mana Wyrm.
Yeah, and Mana Wyrm, he gave a breakdown of it yesterday when we interviewed him. And I think he may have been a little bit ambitious in, selling what Mana Worm did. He said, sometimes the Mana Worm lives and then it just deals 10 damage the next turn, which, seems a little bit ambitious, but I definitely see the merit of what he's going for there. Not as relevant. I do want to give a quick shout out to the Alex Straza he has in his kind of anti-warrior version of the deck as well, because I think one of the ways that Warrior can really extend the game against a mage is just to leave 2 giants on the board and say, you know what, I can tank this for a turn. I'll deal with it next turn.
Yeah.
If you do that when your opponent has an Alex Straza hanging around, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, I also just like the Alex Straza pick because so often I feel with Mage when I'm facing off against Warrior, it's taken me a while to learn a lot of different iterations, but it's not simply as have Giant Conjurers calling, it's measuring up your hand versus the context of the board and finding the turn for when you Conjurers calling. A lot of times it is as early as possible, but a lot of times the second Conjurers calling has to be timed very properly because you just don't have the right reload afterwards. If that board gets cleared, you almost never have a way to develop again. And so the Alex Straza in there lets you play to that strength of that game plan where you're sculpting and molding your hand to where that one Conjurers calling, that first one that's there, doesn't have to come early, and as a result, the Alex Straza can win the game on the back of just the first one that you play.
Yeah, and I think with Alex Straza, Mana Worm, these cards that we're looking at in mind, I think it's very interesting that we're now very deep into a set, very deep into a metagame, and very deep into Specialist as a format, and we're still seeing these little moments of evolution. We've seen in APAC, there's like a Dalaran Librarian coming into one of the players' mage lists to kind of unfreeze frozen minions and still be able to attack. And I think the big talking point is just the success of Control Warrior that we're having this week as well, because we were talking backstage just before the show, like if Control Warrior actually starts to become the deck, that's a huge swing in terms of what other decks are then effective or not effective in the trickle-down effect.
I always make this really badly worded analogy about control decks and the start of a metagame, where it's tough to bring control decks at the start, I think, at least pure control decks, because you don't know what tools you need to get the job done. And then I always follow it up by saying, sure, you could build a house by using a coconut as a hammer, but it's not going to get done very well. It's possible, but why would you do that? Just wait until you get a hammer.
It's a great point. But as you mentioned, Admirable, we have got 6 matches today, and that means we need to start getting on with them. And the first match that we have to look at is BoarControl versus Thijs. Now, Thijs definitely has the spicy meatball in this matchup, but first off, we can take a look at what BoarControl is bringing. And he's on a much more standard deck, in this case, with the Conjurer's Calling Mage.
Yeah, he does have the Luna's Pocket Galaxy, where he was not successful in his first match versus Boston, where Boston, in the interview, said he thinks that Luna's Pocket Galaxy is just bad. I see his point where spending 5 mana and getting no development and getting no card advantage is a pretty major expenditure, but I like to look at this card as like a bootleg Nourish, where you don't get the immediate payoff of it, but later down the road you start to see the effects of that major mana ramp effect, and it can win you games that otherwise you would have had a tough time picking up.
Yeah, interestingly, I think, over the course of a relatively long game, Luna's Pocket Galaxy will gain you a lot more mana than Nourish will in that position. So I think that's an interesting comparison to make. Nourish certainly a more flexible card and a card that's easier to plan around because you can look at the contents of your existing hand and then work out how you're going to deal with Nourish. Whereas Luna's Pocket Galaxy is always kind of a wing and a prayer kind of card to be able to throw it out.
I'll add an asterisk to it and say pre-nerf Nourish.
Sure, yes, exactly, yes.
He's facing off against Thijs, though, and this was a match that was a big talking point for Sottle and I, where we had to speak specifically to Thijs, I think, to really do this choice justice, where Thijs had said, you know what, I have a bad standing right now. I'm up against Silvername, who I thought was really just going to bring another aggro deck, as he's done for week after week. And Thijs got. He brought this deck as a hyper risk, trying to target very aggressive strategies, and he said he wanted to flare it up a bit. Why not have a little bit more fun and take a riskier pick and show everybody that I can strut my stuff with the best of them? And so I don't think this is the greatest competitive choice, but it was a lot of fun to watch.
It was. Yeah, Thijs is an entertainer. He wanted to style on some kids. It didn't work out. He's ended up in a very bad position in his first game, which he ended up losing against Bomb Warrior, which is a miserable matchup. This, I wouldn't quite go as far as calling miserable, but I think Cyclone Mage just overall is a much more effective deck at doing even what Nomi Priest tries to do, which is cycling through your deck to find huge threats and then generating them onto the board.
Yeah, Cyclone Mage, I think, is such a good deck right now because it can play a lot of different roles. It can play the combo deck role, and its combo deck is really kind of strange. It's akin to just like making a bunch of big Edwins, but that's just part of how combo decks work. If they go unchecked for a turn, they get a big payoff. A pretty significant payoff. And for Thijs, he has to be the aggressor in this position. I don't know how he's supposed to do that. I don't know when that's going to happen, because Sottle and I played a bunch of this matchup, and it wasn't working. And something that I'm going to touch on really early on is that Thijs has tended to make a bit more aggressive-looking plays. When Sottle and I were playing this matchup, he failed to draw Wild Pyromancer for a number of games, and so we had to just keep playing until he had a mix of cards that made some sense.
Yeah.
Thijs here throwing away that Wild Pyro, or potentially rather throwing away that Pyromancer early on, I think could come back to really bite him. Yeah,
the problem I had with no Pyromancer draws when I found them is that Admirable was just able to just like generate Sorcerer's Apprentice 3-drop and then like Conjurer's Calling his 3-drop, and then I was just in a mess. Whereas, you know, a Wild Pyromancer would be able to take care of that, spare me using the single copy of Mass Hysteria that Thijs has included in his list.
Combo with your Acolytes.
Combo with Mac, exactly. Like it seemed like Pyromancer was key to some of the potential swing turns that I would be able to generate. But also, one of the big problems that I found myself running into when we were testing this matchup is just Stargazer Luna. Like, if that card hits the board, it's so hard to deal with. You very often used a silence on a Sorcerer's Apprentice early on anyway, so then if Stargazer Luna follows that up, even clearing it with a Pyromancer is a very difficult prospect, and usually the board that surrounds a Stargazer Luna at that time of the game, it's not even going to be vulnerable to a Mass Hysteria if that ends up being your clear. So Stargazer Luna just sticks to the board for multiple turns, and you just sit and weep as the Priest player as their one card just outdraws your deck when you are supposed to be the draw deck.
Yeah, and so that all boils down to Thijs and the turn 2 Wild Pyromancer. I think the early assault is definitely something you need to be aware of. It's something you need to account for. But I think with Acolyte and with Power Word Shield in his hand, I think that Wild Pyromancer early on was a bit reckless.
I wonder.
It's tough to say the word a bit and reckless in the same sentence, but you get what I'm saying. Not quite reckless, but about as close as you get.
Tough choice here for Boar, honestly. Not a huge amount of value being represented in his magic trick.
Kind of like in the mirror image, just to delay the draw from Acolyte.
I think on the general consensus of pick the card that you put in your deck to begin with, it does seem to make the most sense.
I love that one. That was my one Ikeism to help clarify stuff like Archivist Elysiana and Magic Trick, because we just have a lot of like discovery effects that are common right now, or rather, because of the matchup style, they were common. And I was like, how would Ike say this? And I go, I know exactly what Ike would say. Take the one that's in your deck.
Interesting debate for Boar that turn as well. With 2 bananas available to him, he had to weigh up the pros and cons of drawing one less card for his opponent off the Acolyte of Pain versus those 2 extra cards that he can hold in his hand for the Mountain Giant next turn.
This turn. Does this look familiar to you?
This is about what my life was the last couple of days testing this matchup, yeah.
Yeah, minus drawing the Acolyte, minus drawing the Wild Pyromancer, replaced with 2 more 0-cost cards.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I did a lot of this. This happened.
And what I'm looking at is Thijs would definitely have a lot less life had he not played those 2 cards.
Fair.
I think that the Acolyte, you know, certainly generates extra health. It's like a shield block effect in that instance that he played it.
Sure.
But I think that leading into turn 5, turn 6, sure, he might be at 18 or whatever, but his draw potential would just be massive right now. Like, this turn could have been Wild Pyromancer plus the Acolyte of Pain, rip a Topsy-Turvy, rip a Circle of Healing, draw into more 0-cost spells and keep chaining. And I don't think he has to play it on turn 5. I think he's free to wait a bit.
Well, his freedom is definitely going to be taken away very quickly thanks to the Mountain Giant now hitting the board. This is where panic stations start to begin, because your answers to Mountain Giant on curve are very limited. It's not like you're going to have time for your scheme to have built up to the point where you can completely neutralize it. This is definitely panic stations for Thijs now.
I do want to add the caveat that I think that Nomi Priest is inherently very difficult to play. And I don't necessarily think that the skill threshold that's involved is worth the payoff that you get. In fact, I think the payoff is quite low.
Very much agree with that.
So I think this is a deck where if you really want to play a combo deck, this is certainly one of the ones to look to. But you're going to need a lot of games, you're going to need a lot of repetition, and you should expect to be losing games where you make even the most minuscule of errors.
Yeah. I feel if you want to play a very difficult, very punishing combo deck that actually can achieve you very high win rates when you get to master it, just play Paladin instead.
Yes. Yeah. I think Paladin's very good. You know, it's cool because at the Masters Tour, I feel so bad I can't remember the name now. There was a player, it was when Purple had sat down to cast with me as one of the guest casters. Purple's one of the America's Grandmasters. And he was talking about Paladin, and he broke it down so simply, which is the way I always like to break it down. Because you have X amount of damage in your deck that you can deal because of Hammer of Justice and True Silver Champions. He goes, as much as that damage that you can direct his face as you can, you want to do. And that was how the player won a 2-0 versus Control Warrior, was they did not put a single point of damage of attacks into a minion.
Okay.
I'll take damage.
Card draw, damage from hand, and Lunas. All seems pretty solid to me.
Thijs is pushed out of this game, I believe. I don't think he has a way to effectively ever fend off this attack.
No.
Yeah, there's actually no tools in the deck that will take care of this Mountain Giant.
Not from this point, no.
If he draws both schemes and he draws both regenerates, can that ever be enough? I don't think it can. So he would move to 17 health and facing down 13 for the Giant and then Frostbolt Hero Power. Yeah, he's mathematically eliminated here. Oh, what if he also drew the 2 silences? He's already used 1 silence, so that doesn't work. That's what could save him. Chain zeros into Grave Horror.
Chain to Grave Horror, yeah. That's always an out as well. And it's something you have to consider from the mage side in this matchup with Conjurer's Calling. Conjurer's Calling your Mountain Giants into eventual Grave Horrors can actually give your opponent additional outs because they can Seance and get Grave Horrors in their hand, which then become defensive for them. And like that's so leaving your Mountain Giants as Mountain Giants can actually give you more consistent threats. But I think that little look at camera from BoarControl might have just said all you needed to say. He just played his cards and the Priest just kind of fell apart.
And that was exactly our experience in the matchup. Yeah. I recall at some point looking up and thinking, I don't know how Thijs finds a win. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to highlight in day number 1 when he played, why I liked his variation that he found of the turn 1 Northshire into the turn 2 Seance in the Warrior matchup.
Still not convinced.
I know that you're not convinced, but the point about it is it's something we didn't consider. And I think it's something that yielded him tempo, which yielded him a payoff in that matchup, where he ultimately lost due to a top-decked brawl, but he opted to give Silvername the extra turn for that brawl. The point is, that was a variation we did not consider, and I'm curious what other variations we did not consider, because the nature of this combo deck is that there is a lot of variations.
Oh, sure. I will freely admit that I am no Nomi Priest expert, and just in the limited amount of time between trying to grab a few hours sleep and being at the studio broadcasting Hearthstone, there's just not enough time to become a Nomi Priest expert in the time that we had to practice. So
you're killing all day.
Well, so yeah, I'm sure there were things in the matchups on both sides that we missed. You know, I'm sure you could have played better against Nomi Priest with better understanding of what was going on as well, but there has to be a big gap between what we were doing and reality for this to be a favorable position for Thijs.
Yep, and there's going to be a small gap right here because we got to go to a quick break. So when we come back, we're going to be jumping into Game 2 of BoarControl, taking on Thijs in this one. There's 2 records, looking for a win in this one because there's some bucks up for grabs. So stay tuned. More Hearthstone Grandmasters coming up.
I'm George Webb, known as BoarControl in-game. So my name, BoarControl, you would always say this player has board control when you're casting something, and if there's a Stone Chest Boar on board, suddenly that player has boar control. The memory that stands out to me from Hearthstone has to be my first tournament victory, which was at Seat Story House Cup 10. I had to face off against Orange in the semi-finals, Chansifka in the quarters, Fino in the round of 16, so it's a pretty stacked event, and then facing Casey in the final, winning that tournament, that really stands out as the main memory. I like to play decks that get on board, and you have swing turns, and you have trades, lots of trades on the board, you try and get an edge in that sense. I'm also open to playing lots of other decks like combo decks too, but in general in Hearthstone, spending your mana and playing a guy has been the best play you can do. In Grandmasters, I want to do well. It's a new format, best of 3, so it's going to be more difficult to get an edge, but I'll try my best to find that edge and do as well as I can in the tournament.
My name is Thijs. How did I come up with my username? Well, my name is Thijs, and first I was called Thijs NL because Thijs was taken already, so I couldn't take it anymore. And I was a very creative person because I put up my 2 country letters behind it, and that's how I came up with it. What I look forward the most in Grandmasters is the prestige. I have been very looking forward to a more like league-based system, so I was very happy when Grandmaster got announced and really looking forward for like the rivalry between people by all the matches, and I am actually thinking it's gonna be great. What makes me very unique is that I just really am very passionate about Hearthstone. Of course, a lot of fun comes also with winning, but for me it's also the engagement with the community and just like making people so happy sometimes by just like being on stream, being online, playing in a tournament. That motivates me a lot as well to just be there for the community. I have a very preferred style of playing. It's definitely something that I want to be less predictable, but it's always going to be a challenge for me. I want to just prove over and over again that I'm still like one of the best players in the world. Getting to the top is difficult, but staying at the top is, in my opinion, even more difficult. So I'm just going to do everything I can, and yeah, my goal is kind of getting to the World Championship.
Welcome back to the Hearthstone European Grandmasters. We are amidst the match between BoarControl and Thijs. We're using Specialist here in the Grandmasters, which means they bring a deck of a single class, and then they have 2 decks on the side, which are of the same class, but can be up to 5 cards different. They're able to swap them if they want to in games number 2 and games number 3. They don't have to, and they don't have to tell which deck their opponents, which of their decks they're playing. Goodness, why was it so hard for me to say? BoarControl is sticking on his primary deck, so he's using the same 30 cards. Thijs has gone over to his tertiary deck, which takes out a Forbidden Words and a Divine Hymn and adds in 2 copies of Shadow Word Death.
Yeah, no great surprise. I think, as we both mentioned several times, when the Mountain Giant comes down in primary versus primary, it is kind of GG at that point. If you don't Conjurer's Calling the Mountain Giant and it's just one huge 8/8 on the board that isn't going to die to a Mass Hysteria, then that 8/8 is going to connect several times and seal out the game. Thijs has to tech in Shadow Word Death to be able to deal with that, hopefully give him a little more longevity, find his way to those Gadgets and Auctioneer turns, and get through his deck to eventually activate Shadow Word Nomi? Chef Nomi.
As is the nature of the deck, Chef Priest. Yeah. You say GG, but it wasn't GG. But that's why Shadow Word Death's there. And Boar going first here, throws away the Giant, and I think rightfully so. I think that some of the best starts you're going to have in this matchup are going to involve early plays.
Yep.
I'm always thinking Sorcerer's Apprentice, where I'm becoming quickly convinced that it is the strongest card in the deck, given what it's surrounded by.
I think it's hard to make that argument in a deck that features Conjurer's Calling, which is incredibly powerful in this deck. But yeah, Sorcerer's Apprentice does make the magic happen.
A lot of this was started to be reinforced to me when at the Masters Tour in Vegas, Hunter Ace was kind of hanging out, and I said, "Hey, you want to play some games?" He went, "Sure." And then we ended up playing some Cyclone Mage, and he full mulliganed everything looking for Sorcerer's Apprentice. And I was like, whoa, I wanted to keep some of these cards. And we ended up with Banana Buffoons, which sufficed. But long story short, minions are minions, and minions are good.
Yeah, especially going first. I think Sorcerer's Apprentice definitely starts to hit the top of that list when you're on the plane.
Yeah. Such a weird deck where when you're going first, you need to be very aggressive. And when you're going second, you often have a lot of flexibility.
Dude, when you're going second, just every hand works. It's my favorite thing. It's my favorite thing about the deck. Like when you're on coin, you get the worst looking mulligan of all time, but then suddenly your brain just clicks and figures out how that hand actually works, and you still win. Like, oh, it's a beautiful deck.
This hand, on the other hand, not looking so hot for BoarControl.
But he's got 2 of the best card in the deck, Admirable. How can it be a bad hand?
Well, that's the thing, is I am looking at the Sorcerer's Apprentice with Conjurer's Calling, and I think next turn is going to be a very important turn for Boar, where his decision to whether or not he wants to add a bunch of 2-drops to the board can really change how the matchup works. And so the things he's going to think about are Wild Pyromancer and about Mass Hysteria. Yep. And so I don't believe Boar is ever going to land on making a bunch of 2-drops. However, when I compare it to how I've seen Pheno play, which has been nigh reckless, I wonder if he would make a bunch of 2-drops in this spot. It's what we saw him do at the Masters Tour in Vegas. There was a turn in a mirror match where he decided to Conjurer's Calling a 2-drop.
Yeah.
It almost worked out.
Yeah, I think going first in the mirror match, that kind of stuff makes sense. Like, you can't just let your opponent have the initiative to do their Conjurer's Calling late first, which they will do because of having the coin in hand. So Conjurer's Calling on whatever available low-cost minion you have. If it's 3 drops or 4 drops, fantastic. If it has to be a 2-drop, then yeah, sure, go for it in some scenarios. But I think against Priest here, it's a very, very different story. But before Boar has to worry about any of that, he has to deal with what is a very cute and honestly very effective play from Thijs on the previous turn to combine this Acolyte of Pain with the Topsy-Turvy. He is, of course, weak to a potential Banana Buffoon, but based on BoarControl's previous turn, Banana Buffoon is not there.
What's the opposite of Acolyte?
The opposite?
Like, what's an antonym for Acolyte? Because I'm looking at BoarControl's face, and I feel like whatever it is, that's what he is right now. It just feels like he's in pain from this turn, and he really does not enjoy it, unlike Acolyte of Pain, who seems to thoroughly enjoy it if you listen to his lines. And BoarControl just that entire turn was making faces like, just everything in the turn was not good. And frankly, I agree. That was an ugly-looking turn.
It was very ugly.
I'm getting word from production. Defector. Defector of Pain.
Right.
Renegade, that's another one I've got.
So I was going to say, because an Acolyte is like a dedicated follower of something, right? So you could create the antonym by being the opposite of dedicated, or the antonym could be like the leader that is being followed. Yeah, so... This is a useless conversation.
Well, that was a useless turn last turn.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
Someone's laughing because we got the turncoat.
Has now been suggested. That's a good one. I like that. We're going with that one.
Turncoat of Pain.
Yeah.
Wouldn't turncoat be that like you betray Pain though?
No.
Okay.
Full stop. End of conversation. Hearthstone. I was about to comment that, going back, before we got distracted by synonyms and antonyms, I was about to comment that Thijs' cute little play was something that I did run into in our testing, where I was very often considering the merits of Topsy-Turvy on turns like this. Firstly, to be able to draw more cards off my Acolyte of Pain, which is what Thijs did last turn. Secondly, to make sure you contest board objective minions that have to die, like Sorcerer's Apprentice and Luna, which is now what Thijs has done on the follow-up turn. I think that's super interesting that on back-to-back turns, he has once used a Topsy-Turvy to try and draw more cards, and then on the following turn has used it to present a threat. Now, the threat can just be neutralized with just a ping from BoarControl, which is what makes the turn look very wacky, but that ping chokes 2 mana on a 5-mana turn where things that can potentially cost 5 are Mountain Giant and Luna's Pocket Galaxy. And BoarControl absolutely does not want to ping on that turn. He wants to play a big threat.
Huh. I kind of wanted to Zilliax.
If he spends a card that turn, he takes away Mountain Giant Conjurer's Calling as an option on the following turn.
Okay.
But as mentioned previously, Conjurer's Calling on your Giants is not always beneficial for you.
True. And then also, he had the Evocation in hand to discount the
That's also true.
turn.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's interesting.
This game's real wacky.
It's very wacky. Uh-oh.
The card.
Yeah, I think that Thijs is officially in trouble.
So now, what is happening with this Sorcerer's Apprentice? It's trading. Okay. Rare Frost there was an option to leave the Sorcerer's Apprentice hanging around on board.
Ooh, Power Word Shield in Mass Hysteria offers the kill on these Giants. You buff either one, or you buff the Grave Harbor up to 10 health, and then Mountain Giant bumps, and then Grave Harbor bumps, or vice versa.
Yep.
It is a bootleg Super Collider.
Yes, it's worth noting that BoarControl got the one outcome that does not just immediately die to Mass Hysteria. 2 Grave Horrors do die to Mass Hysteria because they attack each other and then attack each other again because they both survived the initial attack. So BoarControl Actually got pretty fortunate that turn, but because Thijs picked up the Power Word Shield, he was able to answer the one outcome.
Big draw, and Boar is going to hang on to this Sorcerer's Apprentice for the...
What are these facial expressions from Boar this series? I don't know what's happening.
He's kind of been doing this the whole season.
Boar is one of my favorite players to watch because he kind of always hams it up to some extent, and also you get very genuine salty reactions when bad things happen as well. But I'm just not sure what in particular these facial expressions were supposed to communicate.
Happiness.
That's why I didn't recognize it.
Yeah.
It's such a foreign concept to me.
Well, British, I mean.
Well, huh?
Well, look what it takes for him to be happy, ripping a Luna's Pocket Galaxy when he just got his board cleared. Yeah. You're like, okay, best draw.
Fair enough.
You know, that was an unexciting auctioneer turn, but this is another one where it presents a very strange position to BoarControl, where he feels like he really wants to kill this auctioneer.
It's a matchup between two decks that really suck at just killing individual minions.
Yeah.
And that's something that can be abused from both sides. So I really like this.
They're both good at taking advantage of particular types of boards, but they're really bad at just killing single minions. Single minions, maybe that's like the thing that no one's looked at yet. Everyone's been trying to like magnetic stuff and go crazy on board and put together crazy combos. No one just thought, you know what, good old-fashioned big stuff.
Play a thing.
Go.
Your turn.
Oh, I know it's done that. There's no 2-drops.
That is an excellent reason. Yeah, Boar with the reaction to the second auctioneer.
Yeah, I think he anticipated this to some degree.
I think, you know, even with the fact that Gadgetzan auctioneer is quite likely to stick in that scenario, I don't think you would risk it unless you had some secondary card draw engine to fall back on. It wouldn't necessarily be the second auctioneer. It could be some kind of Pyro Cleric kind of engine instead, but I think you want something to rely on in that spot.
Burn the other scheme. We're going a bunch of Grave Horrors, and I imagine Seance is on deck here. Yeah, Thijs looking like he might secure a pretty firm lead in this, but Boar has a lot of counterplay to delay Thijs' clock that he's presenting in this situation.
Yeah, what's crucial here is that Thijs has got to his Grave Horrors very, very quickly. And that's important because it means BoarControl has to start looking at using Frost Novas before Thijs is out of cards in his deck. Because if you get down to the Nomi portion of the game and your opponent still has 2 Frost Novas plus any more randomly generated freezes that they have available to just continually lock out your board, like you're going to get into a seriously sticky situation with fatigue. So trying to force Boar here to use freeze effects earlier than that is a very, very big deal. I'm sure it's calling a 0-2 taunt.
We've mostly seen that done for lethal.
Yes.
Not
Not
for your
willingly to one's own taunts.
Behold the tools of creation.
Is that 4 Ray of Frosts available?
Yes, it is. I'll be curious to see how much of this goes towards damage or just freezing. Something else to note is that for BoarControl, if he's able to contain the Grave Horrors to a reasonable effect, leaving a Gadgetzan auctioneer in play can actually be a pretty big detriment to Thijs sometimes.
It can, and I was just about to bring up that exact possibility. With this Ray of Frost, or these Ray of Frosts, representing 1 full freeze this turn and then 2 Frost Novas to fall back on, it's something Boar has to calculate. Like, how messy does my opponent's situation get if I leave this auctioneer alive? But the obvious counter-argument to that is, well, if I kill the Gadgetzan auctioneer, he might not have any more successful card draw engines in hand right now to be able to get through these last 3 cards in a single turn, which then buys me, as BoarControl, a lot more time. Yeah,
and so it's a risk trade-off. And so my my one thought then is specifically the second Wild Pyromancer and a Northshire Cleric.
Yep.
Thijs is so deep into the deck, he's favored to have those right now. This is about to put BoarControl in a heap of trouble.
It's about to draw too many cards for Thijs, though, which is also important because of that fatigue scenario that will come into play with the Frost Novas.
Yeah, I am curious. I am curious how much of an impact that's going to make, and so he's actually looks like he's going to forego that.
Yep.
He wants to clear off the 1 health minion very specifically to push damage, but then Luna's has to be one of your priority kills in this spot, I think.
Is someone injured?
I failed to kill, or you failed to kill Luna, I think, the first time, and I went, oh my gosh, this card's disgusting in the matchup.
Thijs says no. Set up lethal.
Yeah, I don't mind the pressure either. And Boar, you saw the look on his face, like, what are you doing?
Yeah, it's like
I agree.
I get to have my Luna this turn?
Yeah, I agree.
All of my minions cost 0 and you're letting me keep Luna?
By the way, there's 4 Giants in the deck. There's an Archmage Insanitis in here. Like, he's really drawn, you know, few of the big minions. And so, I mean, he just cranked out like 15 extra mana for no reason.
Yep.
By the way, drew 2 cards. By the way, still 10 mana.
Yep.
But with 2 Shadow Word Deaths in hand, I see some setup for it. There's not really a lot of defensive capability for Boar outside of Frost Nova. But there's 2 of those in his deck.
Conjurer's on the 10 there. I guess with a Frost Nova happening this turn, he doesn't have any need for defensive minions.
Yeah, you'd
Goes
also
for the high roll.
You also mentioned just like the 7-8 thing in general, which I noticed and apply once Master Hysteria is gone.
Behold the tools of
And Seance is gone.
creation.
Yeah, but I think the 10s make sense because of the Hakar possibility.
Tools of
Oh,
creation.
you're absolutely right. Yeah, okay. Yep, sold.
But Boar's getting low on his own deck as well, so you know, is Hakar really what you want to grab in that situation?
I think definitely in a vacuum, that's something that is very much a factor in the matchup, as it is against Shivar the Paladin. But you're right, in the current situation, it could end up being a detriment as well. Thijs now in a very sticky spot that I have to say is somewhat of his own creation here. Having chosen to push 7 damage. That 7 damage sounds like a lot, but it becomes very irrelevant very quickly in the face of Frost Nova. Which I think is something that he has to very much consider. Because by leaving Lunas alive, even if BoarControl hadn't found any Frost Novas in the top part of his deck, he was very likely to be able to dig to them that turn with the Lunas. So what good is pushing 7 if your opponent if you're not representing lethal because your opponent almost always Frost Novas you that.
Right, you're also not setting him to a 14 life total, and you don't have any silences left. Like if he had 2 silences left in the deck and he's setting Boar to 14, I think there's way more justification to it.
If he had a nice juicy Dalaran Librarian in his deck,
unfreeze him.
That's the business right there.
Well, that's so crazy to me that that card is just actually perfect for countering Frost Nova when your deck is Giants.
Yes.
Boar also could have been thinking about this specifically too with Shadow Word Death. Like maybe if you get 4 12s, it's just not that bad.
I actually was going to bring that up. Yeah, when I was considering that Thijs felt so confident there in dealing with the situation, it might have been because he had 2 Shadow Word Deaths in hand. So he said, you know, even if Boar cycles through his deck and goes Mountain Giant, Conjurer's Calling, Frost Nova my board, no big deal. I just Shadow Word Death both of his Giants. And yeah, Boar may very well have played around that by going for some not Shadow Word Death targets because there are 4 12s available.
Also, just with the Conjurer's Calling, it means you get to keep bumping and making more 10s. Yeah. I think the 10s are just lining up pretty well in general. Just an interesting spot where I think there's a lot of little things that they don't matter in the immediacy, but in the long term, you can see them add up if that situation occurs. I think in this spot, though, it's boiling down to Thijs is getting checked. The strength of his deck does not match up very well, and that has clearly come to fruition.
And that is a 1-mana wizard.
Yes, indeed it is.
And Thijs with an empty deck does not beat Frost Novas and Fireballs.
Nope. I mean, he might just not even beat Frost Novas, let alone Frost Novas and Fireballs. Right.
What did he spend his free spell on? Oh, the Fireball. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Mana efficiency. I think this Mana Cyclone is almost specifically to protect the card draw if you wanted to Fireball in that case. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it looks like you wanted to draw cards. It's all kind of meaningless at the end of the day. BoarControl has the goods to stop mathematically anything Thijs can throw at him.
Yeah, I'm wondering about whether this Tony needed to be on the board this turn because of the limited amount of Fireballs he did generate.
I think it just ended up boiling down to he's got the stuff to do, and so yeah, this turn could have been done cleaner. Is that relevant when you have 2 more Frost Novas in your hand, some burn, and your opponent's deep into fatigue?
Well, you know, whether it's relevant to the outcome of the game or not, it's always worth talking about, right?
I don't think it is relevant to the outcome of the game.
Yeah, that's
Where
what
our
I'm
point
saying.
is?
Even if it isn't, it's still worth
even
bringing up.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'm not going to debate that, even though I should.
Fair. So Frostnova number 1, he can use Conjurer's Calling to create more board presence for himself to make sure that even if he needs to, even if he doesn't have lethal represented, he can trade down enough of the board next turn to make sure that Thijs never gets lethal himself. Has another Frostnova to back all of that up, even if any of that matters.
Yeah. You're watching a situation where Boar has gotten sloppy with the turns just simply because he knows the win is here.
I mean, I'm not even sure that like playing Antonidas there could be considered sloppy.
I'm just talking about the sequencing of this turn. It's been hectic,
okay,
to say the least, but he's got the game locked.
Yeah.
There's a point where you look at the game and you go, oh, I have this locked. And there's random things that can happen. There's nothing random that can happen this game.
Is someone injured?
And so Thijs taking the honorable route here.
So even there, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. Okay, Boar can pass back for lethal.
Well, he can also heal the Caligus.
Ah, yes.
And it wasn't
Fair,
enough.
fair. That wasn't enough. It's full.
It's even more.
Oh, there's 2 clerics on the board. I didn't even notice the second cleric.
It's
okay,
the Boomsday Project puzzle thing.
Right.
He found it.
I thought it was just 1 cleric. I saw when there was more cards coming, I was like, I'm pretty sure I didn't count that wrong. I counted the number of clerics wrong. That's what I got.
For taking a 2-0 win here, this was, I think, quite expected. Thijs' deck is meant to fight almost specifically aggression and only aggression, and that's not what he faced off against this week.
Thijs' deck was supposed to style on some fools. That's what it was supposed to do, and it didn't quite get that done either.
Just like Frodan.
Sure.
The physical style sense.
Okay. Yeah.
Even though he does style on fools, I just wanted to mention
on a
Frodan
regular
fashion.
basis.
Yeah,
that's just a regular Thursday.
I just wanted to reference fashion.
Okay, fair enough.
And Frodan.
But yeah, I mean, like I said, we spent most of our testing time this week testing that specific matchup or Thijs' matchups for the week. And when we felt like we'd had enough testing, my eventual conclusion was just, yeah, Thijs is going 0-2 this week. And unfortunately for Thijs, that's what ended up happening.
Yep. And Boar's ready for an interview. BoarControl, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
How's it going, my friend?
It's going decent. How are you guys?
I'm pretty fantastic. I have another British gentleman joining me this
Hi.
week as well.
Hi, it's like there's been Dark. Every co-caster changes. Now it's Solo.
So, Nomi Priest, Boar, thoughts, concerns, opinions?
Well, it's a deck you play for fun, and I mean, Thijs had some fun during those games. It's definitely, obviously, he would admit it's not the best competitive deck, and that's how the games pan out. If you hit the right matchups, though, it can be good, but against Mage and Bonmoy, it's just not very good.
Talk to me about Mage, because Mage feels like some of the 28th through 30th cards are in a bit of a shuffle right now. And Boston had said in his interview that he thought Luna's Pocket Galaxy was bad. I disagree with that, but I'm curious about your thoughts on the matter.
I think Luna's Pocket Galaxy is very, very good. I would, if we're facing a metagame where we're playing Mage, Warrior, and Rogue, and that's the expected field, I want Pocket Galaxy against all of them. People get rid of it against Rogue. Those are the 3 matchups where I definitely want it. I don't want it in the hyper aggro matchup. Say it's like a Pirate Rogue with the Raiding Pie, or maybe an aggro Shaman or something. That's when it's bad, when you can't spend 5 mana. But the Rogues are quite slow with Spirit of the Shark. Mages are slow, Warriors slow. Any slow matchup, I want to reduce the cost of my deck and do these super cheating turns with my Luna where I just draw my whole deck. I don't think anything can beat those Luna turns.
Yes. So finally we have some conflict. Fight.
So for instance, if I'm playing on ladder and facing 90% Mech Hunter, as I usually do, I don't want Luna's Pocket Galaxy. But if I'm facing a lot of Warriors or a lot of Shark Rogues, I definitely want it in there.
Yeah, you can probably play Pocket Galaxy against Mech Hunter. That matchup's like, you can do whatever. It's Mech Hunter.
I mean, you just see giant.
So in the second of those 2 games, was your brain hurting at any point, like with all the Acolyte flipping turns, and then when you got towards the end of the game where it was kind of solved, but you were trying to work out the best way to do it? Like, was it difficult for you in any way, despite it being a pretty simple matchup?
It was a little confusing. Some of his plays, I was playing out stuff and then he did a different thing and it kind of threw me a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I had to do something else. But like at the end, I missed some mana and stuff, but I was trying to look at how I lost. And I spent the whole turn roping how I lost. And I was like, oh, I'm out of time. But I couldn't find a way I lost. I had 2 Novas in hand. I was like, once the 4-8, the only way you can lose is if you can't get through the 7-8 taunts. Thijs knew what to do. You don't Saints the Nomi because I never killed a Nomi board. I'm just Novaing. So once I get rid of the taunts, I just push face and it's game over.
I want to talk about your season here for Grandmasters. It hasn't gone ideal for you, I think, to say the least. But talk to me about where you're still finding the motivation to play, because I know that you're always hungry for competition and you always want to show what you have to offer.
Yeah, my score wasn't great. I mean, I could bash the format and stuff, but I haven't been playing perfectly. And without playing perfect, you can't really be one bashing everything that's going on in terms of the format. I would like to have been playing better. I don't really like how it works, where I want to bring decks that I like, and then people just sometimes they bring a counter deck. You saw Holy Wrath Paladin last week against me. That wasn't really a game. That's not really enjoyable Hearthstone for me. I want to play my style, which is the point of Specialist, really, but that's kind of not happened in this tournament. Maybe I should be playing more of a variety of decks, but I'll see what happens in Season 2. I don't want to reveal too much info. I'm going to change deck every week now. But I am disappointed with how it's gone. I'm motivated to win every game. Like, before the game, I was nervous about losing to Nomi Priest. I don't want to be the guy who loses to Nomi Priest, right? So,
well,
definitely looking to win each game.
So talk to me about the Masters Tour in Vegas then, and how it's compared to your season here. Did that feel very different to you?
Yeah. So the Masters Tour in Vegas was very different, because you can't just take your primary for your opponents. You just generally face better matches overall. I was playing Mage, and we'd slightly side decked it for Warrior in the primary, because we knew there'd be lots of Warrior in the tournament. And then we ended up facing, every time we face a Warrior, we have an edge, and you have an edge across the field. Here, it's kind of like, I predict my opponent's going to be on 30% Warrior, 20% Rogue, and then suddenly 10% Paladin. Suddenly they bring Paladin, and I haven't predicted that. If I was against a large field, then I would still face a 10% Paladin, it'd be fine. But when it's 50% Paladin that week, suddenly it becomes a lot worse for you.
I see. Just the increase in variation.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Boar, it's always a pleasure talking to you. I always feel like I learned something new about you, and just always learn something about Hearthstone. Thank you for your time, and congratulations on your win. Looking forward to seeing you play next week.
Thanks, guys. Have a great